All right, so we're back with Ricky in Holman's press. Looks like he's still working on his pamphlet or finishing it, I suppose.
Right. We learned that we learned the stakes here, which maybe aren't clear, or you might suppose you know that in this world it would be bad for him to be critical of the government, but hasn't necessarily been expressed. Now it's clear. He says just reading one of these things would be a violation.
When we get the callback to the first release with Pick a Card, he's playing his own game of chance here. And then we get some stereotyping by Ricky.
Yeah, further examples of how people aren't that simple. Even if this is an oppressive government and, everyone's expected to behave or think a certain way or have certain beliefs, he's looking at several people within the city who he's sort of showing you that there is a spectrum. That's what that's showing us. And also that they're probably not good marks for him to try to hand this contraband to. And then he spots, I don't know how clear this page is, what's going on. But as he's looking at these people, he sees this gruff man setting a duffel bag down next to the keeper at the gate, the gatekeeper, if you will. Focuses in on that. He's like, what's going on here? This is interesting. And as the keeper's checking the duffel bag, in the drawing, he's just like holding it. The idea is that he's distracted by this duffel bag, and that gives Ricky a chance to walk through this gate following the interesting character he just saw. And it doesn't go well. The guy's not happy to be followed. He's sharp. He knows he's being tailed. They've both sized each other up, and they both know the other one doesn't really belong here, and that's why they both find the other one interesting enough for Ricky to follow him and for him to stop Ricky from following him.
I really like how this page shows Ricky, he fucked around, and now he's finding out, how in control Gruff is of the situation. And Ricky can't get out more than 2 words. He's stammering over everything he's trying to say, and Gruff is just not what Ricky expected.
Until he sees what Ricky's carrying around, and then he seems a little nervous.
I think the important thing on this next page is that even though this is the same keeper that this Gruff person has dropped a duffel bag off for, he's taking measures here to hide what he has taken from Ricky, and he seems, like you said, nervous now about what Ricky's carrying.
Right. And even though Gruff and Myers seem to have some sort of agreement and are on somewhat friendly terms from the way they talk to each other, Myers still has authority. I guess I just find that interesting, there's sort of a question mark over the power dynamic there.
So. Yeah, I think this is incredibly important for what we see about Gruff later. See how he handles the situation, how he's talking to everybody. It's a really good foundation for that character. And so then we continue with Ricky returning to Holman's press and continuing his finding out phase. Holman is not pleased with him.
The point is, he doesn't know what Ricky did, but he knows he didn't do what he told him to do, because the reports haven't been filed, and he's used the press. And Ricky, he's got some integrity. He doesn't come up with an excuse. He just tells them, speaking of shared values, okay, I printed a pamphlet because I thought if Nerissa's still out there, maybe something could be done. You've told me, you told me that I should think for myself, and so we're learning about Holman and the shared values they have, that he's an institutional officer, but he's not necessarily, full-on indoctrinated, I guess. He still wants Ricky to think for himself. He'll teach his apprentice, always think for yourself, but never violate the law.
Well, then he goes on, we saw the keepers threatening with the baton simply because he crossed his path. Now we see some of that. Holman lays some of that bare here, and what the consequences can actually be for the slightest of missteps, which is way less than what Ricky did here, and trying to get him to understand that.
Yeah. He does say, as he's leaving, Holman says, were you willing to die for what you wrote? And he says, I thought I was. So yeah, he does know the world he lives in. He knows the government's oppressive, that he watches his friends and family starve to death and sometimes die by, outsiders coming and raiding or whatever. But he still was jazzed up and fired up enough to print this thing, thinking he knew the risks. But once he ran into a little bit of trouble, once a keeper caught him and let him off with a warning, he completely lost his nerve, and he could barely deal with that. So
I like his shame when he's like, none. It's like,
yeah,
I didn't even do one of it.
Yeah. So Holman sends him on his way. You're fired. The risk you took, and so close to the census. I can't abide it. The census. We've heard the census brought up twice so far.
A sign in the first release.
We saw a sign. Mandatory. He also said that the annex is populated, among others, by people from inside Boomtown who are avoiding the institution or its census. So it's like, there's some people who live in Boomtown but are somehow staying off the books that come to to the annex to avoid that. So this thing is coming up. Here's Holman dropping it again, so near to the census. Why is this so important? I mean,
yeah, you've talked about the setting, and we're giving you a familiar ground for us to take you to another place. He talks about the files not being reported. That's the first thing he mentions when he figures out something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, in this setting, any irregularity, especially in a heightened time for the government, is going to be a bad thing. So, him mentioning the census and saying the files aren't reported, those two things happening at the same time are a bad look.
Yeah.
And, he's speaking from experience, so even if nothing happened, he knows what could happen.
and then we've got a long walk home.
The Charlie Brown, Linus walk back to the...
Look, I added that.
I know, I like it.
So yeah, we see him walking back past everything we saw him come through on the way in. First, just see the Black Pyramid in the background to show he's walking, back toward the outside of the city. Anytime someone's walking toward the Black Pyramid, they're heading further into the city and also toward the mountains, away from the wilderness. And anytime you see it to their back, they're heading out away from the Black Pyramid, the city, the mountains. So he walks past that, walks back past the stranger statue, past the cafe, and then he walks past this building that we didn't see on his way in, but that will show up later in the story. And I always figured the artist will be able to draw this in such a way that you recognize it. When you get back to it, you're like, oh, that's that place from earlier. But my art, it's very simple, so I ended up adding this sign that says Z's. So there's a place called Z's in Lowtown. Onward he walks, he looks at his work pass, he frustratedly shoves it back into his satchel. I guess I don't need this anymore. Here's something that goes rat, cat, cat. It's a gun. Sneaks around the corner of a building to see some outsiders are grabbing his people, his fellow slummers. The buildings are burning. Someone's grabbing someone by their hair as they're trying to run away. They're toting guns.
But he gets caught.
Chick-clack. Ricky is not necessarily surprised that outsiders have showed up. So, he thinks clearly from his conversation with this character that it's a Barth who has shown up. A Barth, we've just heard his name mentioned earlier by the Glass Eaters. What we can tell so far is they're probably the muscle for the local slumlord who shake down the slummers when they don't pay. We have enough information to make that assumption. That's what Ricky thinks is going on, and he's trying to offer to bargain with a Barth because he has money. Holman just gave him all the pay he was owed. Presumably everyone owes a cut of whatever money they make, but he's like, I have all this money now, a whole paycheck. Maybe I can get all of us off the hook.
He says he's gonna love this. Who's he?
Who is he?
We're gonna find out.